He thought the soldier was just for show. A statue in uniform. So he kicked him in the face, on sacred ground. What happened next? No one saw coming. They say silence is sacred. Especially here. But that morning, silence was about to be shattered. The sun rose gently over the soft green hills of Arlington, brushing golden light across endless rows of white headstones. Visitors moved slowly, with reverence in every step. You could almost hear the heartbeat of history beneath their feet. Then came a man who didn't belong. Ethan Cole strutted up to the chain-lined walkway like he owned the place. Tall, broad, and wearing sleek black gym gear that clung to every muscle, he had the kind of presence that made people step back, but not out of respect. Out of discomfort. Something about him screamed arrogance. His t-shirt read Cole Combat Elite, no mercy. No equal. He scanned the silent crowd with a smirk, phone in hand, live streaming to his thousands of online followers. So this is the big show, huh? He said mockingly. Guarding a tomb by standing still? Please. I've had interns do more work holding pads in my gym. A few in the crowd turned, frowning. But Ethan loved it. Attention was his fuel. 3 of his personal trainers, men he called the pit crew, hovered behind him, all wearing matching shirts and smug grins. They'd followed him through tournaments, training camps, and viral stunts. They knew the drill. Ethan talks trash, someone gets embarrassed, and his views skyrocket. I've seen tougher mannequins, he said, tilting the camera toward the lone figure standing motionless by the tomb of the unknown soldier. That guy wouldn't last a round in my ring. That figure, still as a statue, dressed in the crisp dark blue uniform of the old guard, was Sergeant Jackson Price. 32 years old, 2 tours overseas, a silver star for valor, and the kind of stillness that only comes from surviving hell. Ethan didn't know any of that. And honestly, he wouldn't have cared if he did. One of Ethan's crew chuckled. Yo, remember that Marine in Denver? Big talker. Lasted maybe 2 minutes before you put him to sleep. Ethan's lips curled. Please. These military types love ceremony. But real fighting? They wouldn't know a takedown from a towel. That's when he stepped over the chain. And everything changed. He stood nose to nose with the silent sentinel. Hey statue man, he sneered. Blink if you're useless. The guard didn't flinch. So Ethan did what he thought would go viral. He raised his foot and kicked the soldier in the face. The sound was sickening. The crowd gasped. And for a full second, nobody moved. Not even the soldier. But then, like a slow-moving storm, the guard's hand rose. Protocol shattered. And when he moved, let's just say Ethan stopped talking. And stopped standing. Want to know what happened next? Stick around. Because what followed wasn't just about one man's disrespect. It was about honor, legacy, and a silence louder than any scream. Before we dive deeper, take a second to subscribe to our channel. Tap that bell icon so you never miss a story that matters. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's return to the hill where silence was broken and honor rose to meet it. Rigid, Ethan muttered, narrowing his eyes. No situational awareness. No readiness. Just static. He crossed his arms, the movement deliberately slow, revealing arms built from years of intense conditioning. To his followers, this wasn't just another trip, it was content. And he was the star. If a guy like that was in a real fight, he said into the camera, he'd be eating dirt before he even knew what hit him. Just a few rows back, someone had stopped walking. David Ruiz, a retired Army Master Sergeant, paused beside a headstone marked with his brother's name. At 54, Ruiz had lived 3 decades in uniform and trained dozens of honor guards over the years. He watched Ethan now, eyes narrowing slightly. He'd seen this kind of posture before. Not confidence, predation. Ethan kept going, speaking to both the crowd and his live stream. I mean, come on, he said, pointing a thumb over his shoulder. This is supposed to be the best of the best? Look at him. No flex, no fight stance, no prep. He looks like a wax figure. I've seen coat racks with more threat detection. He turned, shifting smoothly into a defensive position to demonstrate. The motion was flawless, he knew it. His body moved like it was wired for battle, and in truth, it was. But his mind? That was another story. I teach people how to read the room, Ethan said. How to adapt. If you can't move, you're done. It's that simple. He started pacing slowly, arms behind his back like some smug professor on parade. This poor guy's been trained so hard in tradition, they've stripped the instinct right out of him. There's no edge left. Just muscle memory and polish. Parents began steering their children away. A woman from Ohio whispered to her husband, eyebrows furrowed. The mood had shifted. Reverence had become tension. Let me break it down for you, Ethan said, raising his voice slightly. What we're really seeing here is the gap between performance and power. These guards? They're actors. Their moves look good, but they don't do anything. He threw a few sharp combinations into the air, fast, clean, and just short of showboating. This is what real readiness looks like. I train people who win. Special forces, pro fighters, guys who actually get their hands dirty. You can't learn this from a parade manual. Master Sergeant Ruiz stepped a little closer now, hands in his pockets, quiet but alert. He didn't need a uniform to command presence. The combat infantryman badge on his lapel gleamed softly in the morning light, a quiet declaration that he'd been where others only played. Ethan wasn't paying attention to him. His ego was too busy performing. Ladies and gentlemen, he called out, turning to the crowd with a sweeping motion, this is what's wrong with the old way of thinking. All shine, no substance. It's outdated. It's ceremonial security theater. His crew, 3 lean, intimidating figures, began spreading out subtly around the crowd. Anyone in martial arts would recognize the setup, a live demo in the making. The sacred grounds were being treated like a gym floor, and Ethan stood at the center like a coach before a drill. This, he said, placing a hand on one of his trainer's shoulders, is Jason. Former national kickboxing champ, 3 years running. And this guy here? He patted the back of a thick-armed bruiser. Tommy. Former Golden Gloves boxer. Now one of the most feared instructors in the Southwest. You think these guys are statues? They move. They strike. They dominate. Jason nodded confidently, taping his wrists. Tommy cracked his knuckles with a grin. The message was clear. They weren't just mocking. They were ready to prove something. Ruiz's jaw tightened as he watched. It was one thing to disrespect a ceremony. It was another to turn it into a spectacle. He'd buried friends in this place. He'd trained soldiers who stood right where that guard now stood, men who never flinched, never spoke, never broke their silent promise to the fallen. They weren't statues. They were steel. And these loudmouths were about to find out what happened when steel decided to move. The crowd had grown thicker now, drawn like moths to the uneasy flicker of spectacle. What had begun as a respectful visit was quickly unraveling into something else, something people couldn't look away from even if they wanted to. A group of middle schoolers stood near the front, their wide eyes darting between the silent guard and the man strutting just beyond the chain. Their teachers stood stiffly, unsure whether to intervene or quietly usher them away. Nearby, an elderly woman wearing a gold star pin, a quiet symbol of a mother who'd lost a child in service, stood with her arms folded tightly across her chest, lips pressed together, the sorrow in her gaze deepening with every passing second. Watch this, Ethan said, stepping into a low, precise stance. His limbs moved fluidly, like a dancer who'd traded grace for brute force. Every motion serves a purpose. This isn't for show. This is real. He flowed from one position to the next with mechanical perfection. No wasted movements. No hollow salutes. Just clean, controlled power designed to win. Master Sergeant David Ruiz had seen enough. Quietly, he began moving forward, parting the crowd without effort. He didn't raise his voice, didn't push, but something about him made people step aside. The calm before the kind of storm you only recognize if you've been through it. He wasn't worried for the silent guard. He was worried for Ethan. Ethan continued his performance, now pacing along the barrier like a lion sizing up a gazelle. The problem with traditional military training, he called out, projecting his voice like he was giving a TED Talk, is that it prizes obedience over instinct. You're not taught to win. You're taught to wait, to freeze, to follow. He spun into a kick that sliced the air just inches from the sacred space beyond the barrier. A sharp whoosh echoed across the marble, making several onlookers gasp and take a reflexive step back. And what does he do? Ethan said, nodding toward the guard. Nothing. That's not discipline, that's conditioning. That's how you build robots, not warriors. A mother with 2 young children tugged their hands. That's enough, she muttered, loud enough for those around her to hear. This isn't a circus. We're leaving. Others followed, some shaking their heads, others avoiding eye contact entirely. What had started as unsettling had now turned into something many felt was downright inappropriate. But Ethan wasn't done. I think it's time for a little demonstration, he said, cracking his neck with exaggerated flair. We've had the lecture. Now it's time for the lesson. He began rolling his shoulders, stretching with the focused calm of someone preparing for real contact. His voice dropped just enough to sound serious, and that made it even more disturbing. Ladies and gentlemen, he declared, you're about to see why static defense, the kind these guards are drilled on, is worthless in modern combat. From the sidelines, Ruiz increased his pace. But as he moved, Ethan's team moved too. Like clockwork, they shifted their positions, subtle but deliberate, blocking pathways, shaping the space, creating a ring without ropes. Jake, tall and lean with taped wrists, stepped directly in front of Ruiz and laid a hand casually on his chest. Take it easy, old man, he said, with the smugness of someone who thought he understood everything. It's just a demo. No one's getting hurt. Ruiz didn't flinch, but his voice dropped an octave. That man over there, he said, motioning toward the guard without taking his eyes off Jake, isn't a prop. He's not what you think he is. Your buddy's about to do something he's going to regret for the rest of his life. Ethan didn't hear him, or maybe he just didn't care. He was in his own world now, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet, adjusting his footing like he was center ring in Vegas, not feet away from one of the nation's most sacred tombs. The greatest myth in military culture, he announced, stretching his arms overhead, is that tradition equals effectiveness. That standing still and looking sharp means you're ready for battle. But battles aren't ceremonial. They're messy. They're fast. And they're won by people like me. The camera phone was still rolling. The views were climbing. And Ethan Cole was convinced this was his moment. For my final demonstration, he said, flashing a grin, I'm going to show you exactly why men like him, he gestured toward the guard, wouldn't last 10 seconds in a real fight. He stepped forward. Closer than he ever should have. The guard hadn't moved. Not an inch. But David Ruiz's heart began to beat just a little faster. Because he'd seen this moment before. Right before everything explodes. I'm about to prove, Ethan said, voice heavy with ego, what happens when outdated drills meet real-world combat mastery. He dropped into his fighting stance, every muscle tightening like a coiled spring. To the trained eye, it was clear, this wasn't a warm-up. It was a strike setup, the kind that ends matches, ends careers. He shifted slightly, left foot pivoted, core engaged. The air grew still. In combat, he said, louder now, for the benefit of the crowd, awareness is survival. But this guy, he nodded toward the still, silent sentinel. He's given all that up for a costume and choreography. Ethan began circling, knees bent, hands up, weaving into a pattern that martial artists would recognize as the precursor to a finishing move. A practiced rhythm that masked devastating speed. His training made him a statue, he muttered, not a soldier. A hush fell over the memorial. Tourists stopped moving. Breaths were held. A woman clutched her husband's arm. A teenager instinctively stepped back. Even the birds seemed to pause. Everyone could feel it. Something irreversible was about to unfold. Ethan lunged. A fighter who won't adapt, he declared, bursting into motion. Who can't respond to the moment. His limbs moved with terrifying grace, his strikes snapping through the air in a brutal, fluid combination honed by years of tournament dominance. Has already lost. The final blow came, a spinning heel kick, precise and brutal, arcing directly toward the guard's face with lethal intent. The sound split the air like a thunderclap. Ethan's heel connected, clean, solid, devastating. People gasped. Someone screamed. The force of that kick would have dropped any man. Knocked teeth loose. Sent them sprawling to the ground unconscious before they ever knew what hit them. But Rowan didn't fall. His head snapped to the side from the impact. A thin trail of blood traced the corner of his mouth. But his boots? Still locked. Still rooted. Still in line. Even his rifle, held at ceremonial rest, hadn't moved a fraction. He absorbed the hit like a mountain absorbs wind. Not passive, resilient. The crowd froze. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Ethan landed, catching his balance, chest heaving slightly. A triumphant grin started to curl at the edge of his mouth. "And that," he said, beginning to turn to the crowd, "is why tradition." He stopped mid-sentence. Because Rowan was no longer looking straight ahead. He was looking directly at Ethan. His head had turned, slowly, mechanically, and now those dark, steady eyes were locked onto the man who had just assaulted him. There was no emotion. No rage. No shock. Only awareness. A cold, calculating kind of focus. The kind seen in war zones. The kind that doesn't blink when bullets fly. The kind that only appears when a man trained to protect switches, instantly, to a man ready to end a threat. Ethan blinked. His smile disappeared. "Oh, no," whispered Tommy, the fighter with the scarred knuckles. His voice cracked with something unfamiliar. Something he hadn't felt in years. The memorial fell dead silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the wind held its breath. Because deep down, everyone knew. Something was about to happen. And this time, it wouldn't be a performance. David Ruiz stopped trying to push past the wall of fighters. He didn't need to anymore. His face had changed, not from concern, but from a quiet, grim anticipation. Because he knew the moment had arrived. And then, finally, the soldier moved. But it wasn't the awkward shuffle of someone jarred out of a routine. It was precise. Efficient. Like a door suddenly opening after years of being sealed shut. The rifle slipped from Rowan's white-gloved hands, hitting the stone with a sharp metallic clatter. And in a blur of motion that defied his stoic posture, he crossed the distance between himself and Ethan Cole with shocking speed. Years of combat training, real training, now had a target. Ethan's eyes widened, and to his credit he reacted fast. He dropped into a defensive stance, body coiled, adrenaline rushing in. "Now we're talking," he said. But the confidence in his voice had hollowed out like a drum that's been hit too many times. "Let's see what they really teach you, toy soldiers." That's as far as he got. Because Rowan struck. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't theatrical. It was clean, clinical, and terrifying in its simplicity. A strike, sharp and controlled, cut through Ethan's guard. His body jolted, feet stumbling backward as the blow cracked through his defense like a blade through paper. Rowan didn't speak. Didn't gloat. Didn't glance at the crowd. He was executing, not performing. Ethan tried to recover, resetting his stance, launching into a blistering combo, the same combo that had once brought him national titles and viral fame. But Rowan wasn't there to play points. He read the movements mid-air, intercepted them with effortless precision, and in one fluid motion, brought the self-declared champion crashing to the ground. The breath left Ethan's lungs with a wheeze. His arms flailed once. Then silence. Rowan knelt, one knee pressed firmly on Ethan's chest, not cruelly, but with undeniable authority. Enough to immobilize. Enough to command. Not to harm. The fighter's face shifted, from shock to confusion to something he hadn't felt in years. Defeat. Every time he tried to move, Rowan adjusted, subtle, calm, absolute. Like someone used to chaos and trained to remain still inside of it. Then, for the first time, the guard spoke. "Stay down," Rowan said, voice even and unwavering. "This is over." That's all he said. And somehow, it carried more power than any of Ethan's shouts or kicks. Master Sergeant David Ruiz stepped forward. This time, no one tried to stop him. The circle had broken. Ethan's trainers, Jake, Tommy, the whole pit crew, stood frozen, their cocky swagger drained into tight-lipped silence. "I believe," Ruiz began, his voice clear and crisp, "you've just received a hands-on lesson in the difference between sport fighting and actual combat operations." Ethan squirmed beneath the pressure, trying to get a word out. "You can't, what the hell is this?" But Ruiz cut him off gently, like a teacher correcting a child who still didn't understand. "Staff Sergeant Rowan can do a lot more than what you've seen here today." He glanced toward the crowd, now gathering again from a respectful distance. Their expressions had shifted, from curiosity and discomfort to quiet awe. Before his ceremonial assignment, Ruiz continued, Rowan served 2 combat tours with the 75th Ranger Regiment. He's a Bronze Star recipient, a Purple Heart recipient, and yes, that's a combat infantry badge on his chest. Ruiz stepped closer, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "The men you mocked, they've already proven themselves. Not in tournaments, not online, but in places you've never heard of. Places where silence isn't a performance, it's survival." The air shifted again. Behind them, Arlington security staff were moving in, radios crackling, boots closing in across the marble stone. But no one interrupted. No one dared. Because the real moment, the one people would remember, was already happening. It was the sound of arrogance falling quiet. Of a crowd realizing they hadn't just witnessed a fight. They'd witnessed a reckoning. "Rangers," Jake whispered, the color draining from his face. His earlier bravado had completely vanished. Master Sergeant Ruiz nodded, finishing the thought for him. "That's right. Rangers are never to be underestimated." Staff Sergeant Rowan still hadn't said a word. He knelt silently, his breathing steady, his grip unrelenting. The thin trail of blood from Ethan's earlier kick had dried on his chin, but his expression was unchanged. Detached. Focused. 1,000-yard stare honed not on a mat or under a spotlight, but in the unforgiving quiet of war zones where every second could mean life or death. Ruiz turned, now speaking not just to Ethan, but to the entire crowd gathered in stunned silence. "Every man chosen for this duty," he said, gesturing toward Rowan, "is an active-duty combat soldier. These aren't ceremonial actors. They've been tested, on real ground in real danger. The discipline you mistook for weakness, Mr. Cole, is the same discipline that keeps them alive. And protects others." Ethan had stopped resisting. His chest rose and fell, shallow breaths chasing clarity. The look in his eyes had changed, from dominance to disbelief to dawning humility. "I didn't expect actual combat training," he murmured. "No," Ruiz replied, his tone firm but not cruel. "You wouldn't have. Because your world is ruled by rules, timers, trophies, and cameras. Rowan's world doesn't come with referees. His training exists for one purpose, to complete the mission, and bring his brothers home." At that moment, cemetery security arrived. Quiet, swift, and efficient. Their formation surrounded the scene, but no weapons were drawn. No shouting. Just a measured response rooted in training. The supervising officer approached, nodding respectfully to Ruiz. "Master Sergeant. We'll take it from here." Ruiz inclined his head. "I believe Staff Sergeant Rowan has already handled it, Lieutenant. Mr. Cole here made the unfortunate decision to test our tomb guard's combat readiness, directly." The lieutenant's eyes swept the scene. Blood on the guard's face. A so-called fighter pinned to the ground. Spectators frozen in respectful awe. "That's assault on a federal officer," the officer said, voice tightening. "Several felony counts, easily." "Indeed," Ruiz said. "And I imagine the U.S. Attorney's Office won't take kindly to anyone attacking a decorated soldier, especially here." Rowan looked to the officer, awaiting instructions. A subtle nod came. With one fluid motion, he stood up. Smooth, silent, without hesitation. And without so much as brushing the blood from his cheek, he stepped back into position, at attention. Focused. Undisturbed. It was as if nothing had happened. The circle of onlookers widened slightly. No more phones held high. No more whispers. Just quiet respect. Ruiz turned toward them, his voice calm. The uniform he wears isn't a costume, he said. It's earned, not given. And every man who wears it has already proven himself, under fire, under pressure, when it mattered most. A teenager near the front raised his hand slowly, voice unsure. But why do they just stand there? If they're that highly trained, isn't it a waste? Ruiz smiled gently. No. It's the highest use of their strength. You see, anyone can act tough with a crowd watching. But it takes real power, real discipline, to stand still when your instincts scream to move. To honor the fallen with silence when your body was built for battle. That's not weakness, son. That's something far rarer. He paused, glancing once more at Rowan, stoic, still, and silent in the morning sun. That's devotion. The boy looked down, his face thoughtful. The woman with the gold star pin nodded quietly, her eyes misty but proud. As the security team escorted Ethan and his crew off the grounds, the energy around the tomb shifted once more, returning to what it had always been. Reverent, silent, sacred, because those who stood there had earned that silence. That's a common misunderstanding, Ruiz said, folding his hands calmly behind his back. A lot of folks think these guards just stand here all day, like statues. He paused, glancing toward Rowan with a quiet reverence. But what most people don't realize, he continued, is that this duty rotates. The man you see standing perfectly still today might have been on a nighttime patrol through Helmand province last year. And next year, he might be redeployed into active combat. The crowd listened, no longer just watching but absorbing. Their stillness isn't their main skill. It's just one of many. It's a demonstration of discipline and of control. And that control carries through everything they do, on or off the battlefield. At that moment, the cemetery security supervisor returned, his steps brisk but respectful. He stopped in front of Ruiz and gave a short nod. Master Sergeant, Mr. Cole is now in federal custody. Due to the location and the nature of the incident, the charges are serious. As they should be, Ruiz replied, his tone steady. Attacking a serviceman here, at the tomb of the unknown soldier, crosses a line few ever dare to approach. The justice system won't treat that lightly. The supervisor hesitated a beat, then added, he's requesting to speak with the guard. Claims he wants to apologize. Ruiz looked to Rowan, who still stood at ceremonial attention, unmoving, unreadable. But there, just barely, came the faintest nod. That can be considered after his shift, Ruiz replied. Though that decision rests with Staff Sergeant Rowan's chain of command. He turned back to the crowd, now drawn in closer, not out of curiosity anymore, but something closer to respect. You see, Ruiz said, what Mr. Cole misunderstood, and what many civilians understandably don't realize, is that military excellence isn't measured by trophies or highlight reels. In sports, success means beating the other guy inside a set of rules. In the military, success means completing the mission, when the rules break down. When the mission is everything. He motioned toward Rowan's uniform, slightly rumpled now from the confrontation. The sharp crease of his jacket had softened. A faint scuff marked one of his white gloves. This stillness, Ruiz continued, this ability to stand unmoved for hours, isn't separate from combat training. It's born from it. That same mental control is what allows a soldier to stay calm during an ambush, to think clearly under fire, to protect others when everything else is chaos. A middle-aged woman raised her voice gently from the crowd. But why didn't he react right away? I mean, that man got right up in his face. Even kicked him. Ruiz nodded as if he'd been waiting for that question. That's fair, he said. And the answer lies in their rules of engagement. These soldiers are trained not just in defense, but in restraint. They are taught to differentiate between disrespect and danger. You don't respond to ignorance with violence. He paused, then looked toward Rowan again. But if you are attacked, you respond exactly like he did. With control. With precision. Not a hair more force than necessary. Not a moment sooner than allowed. A young medic approached then, carrying a basic first aid kit. After exchanging a few words with Ruiz, she stepped carefully into Rowan's space. He didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't look away from his post. She dabbed gently at the dried blood along his jawline, checking for swelling. Still, Rowan didn't move. The crowd watched in reverent silence. When she finished and stepped back, Ruiz returned to his explanation. To serve as a guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier is one of the highest honors in military life. These aren't ceremonial puppets. They're chosen because they've already distinguished themselves in real operations. They've earned these uniforms not through drills, but through action. He looked at the faces before him: tourists, teenagers, veterans, families. All of them had changed. There was no mockery left. No smirks. Just understanding. If Mr. Cole had done his homework, Ruiz said evenly, he might have learned that many of these guards have service records that make his tournament wins look like participation ribbons. Hours later, after the sun had crossed high noon, Staff Sergeant Micah Rowan emerged from the tomb guard quarters, no longer in ceremonial dress blues, but in standard duty uniform. Simpler, practical, humble. He'd undergone a full medical check. The base doctor had confirmed it. No concussion. No fracture. No damage beyond a bruise and a cut lip. You absorbed the hit beautifully, the doctor had said, impressed. You rolled with it. Textbook response. Probably saved you from a broken jaw. Rowan had just nodded. Because he didn't need praise. He'd done what he was trained to do: stand, protect, endure. And now? He was ready to do it again. The instinct to reduce impact was second nature now. Staff Sergeant Micah Rowan had trained his body through thousands of repetitions, learning how to absorb force, how to redirect it, how to survive. Not for trophies. Not for applause. But for the mission. Always the mission. The medical exam confirmed what he already suspected: no major injury. Just a bruise. A scrape. The kind of wound that fades in days but teaches for life. He'd endured far worse in places that didn't show up on maps, where injuries didn't come with medics or second chances. Meanwhile, in a quiet room inside the cemetery's security office, Ethan Cole sat alone. His championship brand compression shirt was wrinkled now. His hands, once clenched into fists of bravado, now rested awkwardly in his lap. The roar of the crowd, the ego, the showmanship, all of it had dissolved into a sobering silence. The door opened. Rowan stepped in, calm and composed, not a trace of ego in his stride. Ethan stood immediately. Not because he had to, but because something deep inside him told him to. This wasn't about rank anymore. It was about respect. The security supervisor gave a nod. Mr. Cole has been formally charged with assaulting a federal officer. But he asked to speak with you before transport. Rowan gave a small nod. Understood. The door closed behind them. The room was quiet. Two men, once opponents, now sat across from each other, both seeing more clearly than they had hours ago. Neither needed to fill the silence quickly. There was weight in the stillness. That was Ranger training, wasn't it? Ethan asked after a pause, his voice soft. Honest. The arrogance had vanished. I've sparred with military guys before. But that wasn't the same. That wasn't anything I've ever faced. Rowan's answer was steady, like everything else about him. We train for mission success under extreme conditions. He didn't brag. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Ethan chuckled, but the sound was hollow. Mission success, he repeated. Right. He gestured to the empty chair. Would you mind? Just sit for a second? Rowan sat. Not casually, not defensively, just with quiet readiness. His spine still straight, his presence still steady. Ethan took a breath. I messed up, he said plainly. Big time. I looked at you and saw something to challenge. Something to beat. I thought if I showed up one of America's most elite soldiers on camera, I'd prove something. He looked down at his own hands, hands that had once been cheered, now trembling slightly. I didn't realize what I was actually challenging. Rowan nodded, eyes steady. Most civilians don't. It's not your fault. You're not supposed to see it. Not all of it. Ethan looked back up. That stillness out there. I thought it was just for show. Empty. Some kind of military pageant. But that wasn't stillness. That was what? Control? Exactly, Rowan said. The same control that lets us stand for hours without moving is the same control that lets us function under fire. In sandstorms. In the dark. When everything is falling apart. Ethan's eyes filled with something unexpected, not fear, not anger. Gratitude. I needed this, he admitted. Not the fight. Not the defeat. But the lesson. I've built a whole career on being the guy who can't be beaten. But today, I got taught what it really means to be trained. Rowan didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Instead, he simply said, it takes strength to admit that. Ethan stood, offering his hand. Rowan took it. There was no fanfare. No cameras. Just a handshake exchanged between two men, one humbled, one unwavering. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees lining Arlington's sacred grounds. The tourists had come and gone. The silence had returned. But somewhere, in the center of that silence, something had changed. One man walked away in cuffs. But not without dignity. And the other? He walked back to his post, unshaken. Still ready. Because honor doesn't need applause. It just needs discipline. Marcus nodded, slowly letting the truth settle. In competition, he said almost to himself, everything I do is meant to be seen. Flash, flare, impress the judges, score the points. He looked up at Rowan. But what you did out there, that wasn't for show. It wasn't fancy. Just effective. Rowan didn't flinch, didn't blink. Different missions need different training, he replied. My job isn't to collect trophies. It's to protect sacred ground and to honor those who never came home. Marcus leaned back, eyes flickering toward the door where federal officers waited, ready to take him into custody. They're going to prosecute me fully, aren't they? Rowan didn't sugarcoat it. Most likely. Assaulting a soldier on active duty at Arlington Cemetery, they don't take that lightly. Marcus nodded again, this time with a strange calm settling over him. I deserve it. All of it. The second I decided to use that place like it was my gym, I crossed a line. He sat up straighter, not trying to escape consequence but trying to meet it head-on, maybe for the first time in a long time. I'm sorry, he said, eyes steady. Not just for the kick, but for the disrespect. I treated something sacred like it was a stage for my ego. I see that now. Rowan studied him for a long beat. No emotion. No lecture. Just a quiet, measured gaze that had learned to tell real regret from performance. Then, with the same precision he brought to every part of his duty, Rowan gave a single nod. Acknowledged. He stood and turned toward the door. But Marcus had one more question. Can I ask you something? That kick, I've dropped guys bigger than you with that same move. You didn't even flinch. How do you train for something like that? Rowan paused at the door, glanced back with the faintest trace of professional respect. When you've been in firefights where your brothers' lives depend on you keeping your head straight, he said quietly, a kick to the face is just another Tuesday. And with that he left. No drama. No grandstanding. Just a return to duty, like nothing had happened. Behind him, Marcus Kane sat still, pinched. A man who'd built a life mastering physical combat had finally come face to face with a different kind of strength. And for once, he wasn't trying to win. He was just learning. The next morning, the air over Arlington carried its usual hush, part reverence, part remembrance. The sun broke cleanly over the marble rows of headstones. And there stood Staff Sergeant Micah Rowan once again. His dress blues crisp. His gloves white. His bearing perfect. The faint bruise on his jaw was nearly invisible, but even if it hadn't been, no one would have mentioned it. The crowd that gathered now held a different posture. Their voices were softer. Their movements more deliberate. They stood not just to watch, but to honor. At a quiet distance, Master Sergeant Ruiz passed by, pausing briefly to observe the morning post. He watched the way tourists stood back with new awareness, the way Rowan remained unmoved, resolute. Ruiz smiled. A small nod. Then continued on his way, his own morning visit complete. Sometimes, he thought, the most important lessons aren't spoken at all. Sometimes they're taught with silence, with stillness, and with the kind of strength that never asks for recognition. So now ask yourself, if you had been in Marcus' shoes, would you have recognized the difference between performance and purpose? Would you have mistaken discipline for weakness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story gave you something to think about, if it showed you a side of military service you'd never seen before, then give it a like, share it with someone you respect, and make sure to subscribe to Guard's Moment. Tap that bell icon so you never miss another powerful story. And don't forget, check out the other videos now appearing on your screen. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, with another story that reveals the truth behind the uniform. Till then, stand tall, speak less, and never underestimate quiet strength.